are listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
That funky smell on your street was the dinosaur's favorite treat. This episode is sponsored by Ginkgo biloba. Dinosaurs love it!
Hi everyone, thank you for listening to this episode of Rootbound. I am the host of this program. My name is Steve, and Rootbound is the podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside. And each week I invite a guest who joins me on the show to share with us all about a plant that means something to them. And then I share with the guest about a plant that means something to me. And through this process, we can all learn more about plants and learn more about each other. Now, before we meet our guest today, I want to preview a couple of things that we're going to hear about here in the show. I don't normally do this, but today I have to preview a couple things. First of all, Star Trek. If you like Star Trek, stay tuned to the end of the show because I think we have a very fun conversation. And even if you're not into Star Trek, I think it's a fun conversation. So, and how we weave Star Trek into a plant podcast, I think you will enjoy very much. Second, this has to do with the name of the plant that our guest is going to talk about. So I'm just going to tell you that plant right now. It is the betel nut. And in the episode, you'll hear a bit later that we were trying to figure out what that word betel or betel means, and we couldn't quite figure it out. So when you listen to that part, you will now have the answer when we're trying to figure it out later when we don't know the answer. So here it is. It's actually a pretty interesting story of how the word betel nut got that name, betel or betel. So first of all, it's not spelled like the bug beetle. It's B-E-T-E-L, which, when I first heard that, I was like, I don't know what that means. Does that have a meaning in English? I'm not quite sure. Our guest, who we're going to meet in a minute, she said the word she used in her language is entirely different, so she wasn't even sure what the plant was at first. She had to do some research. So let's explain the word betel in betel nut or betel nut. So the betel nut comes from this palm tree. You'll hear about it later. But it is often served with a leaf that is known as the betel leaf. And those are entirely different plants, but because they are associated with each other, I understand that the betel nut became the betel nut because it is associated with the betel leaf. But where did the name betel leaf come from? Like beetle and betel leaf. So that apparently comes from Portuguese, but via the Malayalam language, which is a language spoken in the Kerala state of India. And this is an area historically where Portuguese interacted and did a lot of trade in the Indian continent. And there's a word in Malayalam that sounds similar to betel with some Portuguese kind of transmutation. And that was the word for the betel leaf. And then later, the nut became associated with a leaf, and so the name transferred in English and all of the European languages based off of that Malayalam word. So a really interesting, weird history of how this word became betel nut based off of its association with another plant, based off of a mispronunciation in Portuguese of a word in an Indian language. Super fascinating. And then that made me think, so there's this B-E-T-E-L. There's another word that comes to mind when I see betel, and that is the word Betelgeuse, which is, the name of a star, not the ghost. It's spelled quite differently, but it's got that B-E-T-E-L in there. It's like, are those related? And the answer is no. They are completely different etymological origins. The plant is from the Malayalam language, and the star name is derived from an Arabic word that is referencing the shoulder of Orion, which is where Betelgeuse the star is. So completely different. The star has nothing to do with the plant or the popular TV ghost, as I said.
Breakfast orange beetle, beetle fruit, beetle breakfast, beetle drink, beetle beetle juice.
Yes, that's it!
Name's Beetlejuice.
You said it twice. Just say it once more. Come on.
Hi, Navya. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Rootbound.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you have a plant to share with us today?
Yes. Have you heard about the betel nut?
I have heard about the betel nut, and I'm very
Okay.
curious because I don't know very much about it, and I think it's like a controversial plant, maybe in some ways. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's so accurate.
Awesome.
It's really surprising because in South Asia and Southeast Asia, it's a really, really big plant, but most people in the West have not heard about it because it's like basically non-existent.
Interesting.
Um,
Let's just start off maybe why you chose this plant. Why is it meaningful to you?
it's a controversial plant, but it's used in so many different ways that everyone like it's just curious as to why it is controversial. Like it's used for medicine,
Mm-hmm.
but also it using it can lead to like cancer. But it's
Mm.
in Hinduism, it's used for religious reasons. It's like an everyday snack.
Well, that was a lot of things.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. Yeah, that's it's one of those things. Like I had a feeling. I think what I've understood from betel nut is just like someone who's grown up in the United States and doesn't have any connection to Indian culture or Eastern,
Mhm.
Eastern cultures because it's used more in other places than India, right? It's used in a
Yeah.
lot of places.
Like yeah.
Like where?
Like it was actually from the Philippines, then it moved
Oh.
over to India due to trade, colonization, all that stuff.
But I've got the impression that it's like a little bit like tobacco. It's something that has like legitimate traditional use, and then it kind
Mhm.
of got corrupted by like corporatism and things like that. I don't know. That's just my like impression
Uh
of it.
huh.
I,
I mean, I think that could be right, but it's also just one of those things that is like old people just constantly have it in their mouth because it's addicting.
yeah. Okay.
So
Okay. Sure.
yeah.
Sure. Well, tell me more about it. Like, I mean, yeah, I think. Well, I mentioned an email to you. First of all, I was also confused because
Hmm.
I've had beetle leaf before, but I understood
Hmm.
that that's actually a different plant than beetle
Yeah, I'd
nut.
never heard of that.
The I think the word in at least in Bengali is pan leaf.
Okay.
It was
Uh
also
huh.
sometimes called beetle leaf, but I don't know why they're called the same. Anyway,
Uh huh.
it's all confusing to someone who's not grown up in the culture. So I'm very happy to have
Yeah.
you here, like talk about it more and explain it to me and the audience.
Well, it's interesting because pon is this treat that is in a leaf, and then they'll put betel nut in it, and then they'll put a couple more things, and then they wrap it up and you like eat it. And it's like an after dinner thing that like refreshes your breath and it helps with digestion. Apparently, I don't know.
Sure, that's what
And
I've
it's like a
had.
treat. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've had. I went
Hmm.
to India a number of years ago for a wedding, and I had some of
Hmm.
that. I also had something they called, which is really silly. It was called fire pond. Have you heard of
Uh
this?
huh. Yes.
And they like shove a burning leaf in your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was unrelated to the. I don't know. Maybe there was some betel nut in there, but I think it was just the
Yeah.
leaf.
There probably was, and I feel like that fire pond is things they made up for tourists.
I
Because
think so.
like
I think
I
so.
swear,
I
I
tried to
have
Google
never
it.
ever had that.
I tried to Google it, and it was like no results. And it was like, oh, this is clearly somebody just invented this in the last 5 years. Um,
Yep.
yeah, to go viral on Instagram. Yeah,
Yeah, to get you tourists to spend money.
yeah,
That's it.
for sure. Um, anyway, let's get back to betel nut. Tell me about the plant.
Mhm.
Tell me. I want to know all about it. What's its deal?
So the betel nut is a plant that grows on trees. The trees are like super humongous.
Oh,
Yeah, they're actually super tall, and they grow in bunches on the tree, kind of like bananas.
oh,
And
wow.
and it takes like several harvest seasons to grow this. And my cousin in India actually grows them, so that's why I know
Oh,
so much.
cool. Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
so I've been around them a lot. And once it's time to harvest, they need to go in and kind of like knock the whole bunch of betel nuts down and like catch it in like a net because there's just so much growing on the tree.
Wow.
Exactly like bananas.
Interesting. And so while you're talking a little bit more, I'm gonna Google a
Mhm.
picture just to like fill it in
Yeah.
the thing. So they're like, how big are they?
The nut or the tree?
The nut.
I would say like probably like a small peach or a plum.
Oh, okay. They're bigger than I
Yeah.
expected. Oh,
Mhm.
they're like it's like from like a palm tree.
Yes, it's kind
Oh,
of like a palm tree, exactly.
interesting. Oh, I had no
Hmm.
idea. Oh, wow. Look at those.
Yeah.
They look like fruits. I would,
Yeah.
but so like, do they have like is it like the seed in the middle of the fruit part?
Hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
What I learned during my research, because I didn't know this, is you can actually eat them raw. So you can get them from the tree and just bite it, and then you can chew it, and then you're supposed to spit out the juice that comes out of it, and then keep the rest of it in your mouth. And I actually didn't know you could eat it raw. Apparently, if you eat it raw, it tastes terrible.
Okay,
That's what TikTok told me.
interesting. So that's
Yeah.
really fascinating. Okay, so when you say you don't eat it raw, how is it normally prepared then?
Well, I guess depending on what part of the world you're on, you can eat it raw.
Mhm.
But the way my family and the part of India where I'm from, what they do is usually they will roast um, the whole like nut in like a big like kennel. Is that what they're called?
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know,
yeah,
like a
kettle, yeah.
yeah, a kettle. Yes,
Yeah,
there we
yeah,
go.
not where you put the
Not a
dogs.
kettle. Sorry.
Where you put yeah, got it, yeah.
um, and then what they'll do is they will then crack it open, and then they'll get this nut that's officially dried out because of the roasting process, and it's this beautiful, beautiful shade of red.
Oh wow, let me look that up too. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
And so then you have these nuts, and then tell me more about how they're used, and yeah, that's
So one use is, of course, like everyone kind of just eating them because it's a stimulant and
mhm.
it relaxes you at the same time, which I don't understand the science.
I think that it reminds me of a little bit of like how people use tobacco as well. Like
Yeah,
it's a stimulant that helps you like chill.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
hmm
right. Interesting.
And
And you
so
chew it?
people, yeah, well, if it's raw, I guess you can chew it. But if it's already roasted, so usually you suck on it. There's like a leaf, and then there's like this white stuff my grandma puts on it. I promise it's not an illegal substance. Like I don't know what it is. I tried googling to figure out what it is, but I have no idea. Um, but you put it in your mouth and you suck it, and then the after effects of doing this is it turns your mouth red and your teeth red. So you'll see a whole bunch of old people in countries that eat this just walking around with red mouths all the time because it stains your mouth.
Interesting.
hmm
Interesting. What does it taste like?
I have no idea because I don't think I've had like a big like I've had little bits of it mixed in other
Uh-huh.
stuff, but I've never had a big one to really
Interesting.
identify the taste. Yeah.
Interesting. Man, very fascinating. So it's like you feel like it's like a something that older generations are really into, and maybe like younger generations aren't as much.
Yeah, I think so because I think as younger people are a lot more. We care about our looks a lot more. Like, so I feel like if it did leave a mark, people probably would.
Interesting. So, and you
Yeah.
said you've had little bits of it and stuff. So, is it also used like in recipes in other ways, or what? How else is it used?
It's like it will be mixed in with like some like sweet stuff and everything, and it's given to you after dinner
Oh,
sometimes.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, interesting.
And in that quantity, it tasted like bark to me, but of course, I didn't have the whole thing, so I don't know
That's so
the
interesting.
full
This
taste.
reminds me a lot of. We were talking an episode of a few episodes ago about the kola nut, which is
Uh huh.
a nut from Africa that has. It's a similar. It's this nut that is actually has caffeine. It's like where the
Okay.
caffeine in Coca Cola, the cola part.
Uh
Coca
huh.
Cola originally was from this
Oh
nut.
yeah, yeah.
But the same thing.
Okay.
It's like people chew on it or they suck on it, and it's like a stimulant, and it's really,
hmm
really like part of like cultural stuff as well in lots of
hmm
parts of West Africa. So the similarity is very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you remember like the first time you like um, encountered this plant?
Well, it's something that is often used in Hindu ceremonies. So, whenever we're giving offers to God or like we're having a special ceremony, like a wedding or anything really, there's always just like a little bit of it around. And it's also like given to the God as a offering as well. So, it's always around. Like, it's in my house. I know where it is.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. So like,
Yeah.
you mentioned you're in California. So like, do you have to get like how? I guess you can just go to like a Indian stores and they just have it for various religious
hmm
and snacking purposes.
Yes, they have it all over the Indian store. But I was doing research, and apparently, this is also used in traditional Chinese medicine. So
Oh,
I guess if you go to those stores, you would see it as well.
interesting. Really, really
Yeah.
interesting.
hmm
That's fascinating. So and you said your cousin has a farm,
Yeah, my
and
cousin has a
you've have
farm.
you been there?
Yes, I have.
That's pretty cool. Tell me about that. Like,
Yeah.
what's it look like?
It's just like a farm of like gigantic trees everywhere. And since it's since they're like they grow in little like bunches, like they're always constantly falling. Once they like it's time to harvest them, so you'll suddenly hear a plop, and one of them will be on the floor.
That's very funny.
And it's really cool because it's kind of like a cash crop in India. It's something that farmers will also grow on the side, also along with their like other plants because the betel nut I think it's a much stronger plant, so it will last longer, and they don't have to sell that product right away, so they can keep it when it's time for them when they need the money. They can sell it, and it will always be profitable.
That makes sense. That's very very interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I guess the one thing I want that you mentioned briefly, and this is like one of I feel like this is a thing where like I've heard about this, but I feel like it's just like that's all you hear about. Of like you said, it can give cancer, right? Which, but I feel like there's lots of stuff if you do it all the time can, and I think there's a lot of like Western like point of view about it on that. But like, what is about like that like the stimulant aspect of it? Is there like
According to Google, it's addictive, which would make sense because the old people are always chewing it,
Yeah, sure.
or sucking on it. So, and it's like it kind of stays in your mouth like chewing tobacco,
Huh.
and like chewing tobacco basically does the same thing, right? It ruins your teeth and it gives you mouth ulcers, all that good stuff. So, betel nut does the same.
I just totally like sparked this memory and I just Googled it just to like be like, oh, this is true. At one point, my dad like in his neighborhood, there was like a little like market that was like an Indian market. It was like a store that had a lot of Indian stuff, but it was like a little convenience store. And he started buying this stuff called gutka and using gutka, which apparently is a blend of betel nut and tobacco. That is like a like a chewing tobacco thing. And he was like. He kind of got addicted to it.
Oh, I bet.
And he had like, I gotta stop this because I think it's like, I'm looking at the Wikipedia now. I think it's like it's like super betel nut. It's like betel nut on steroids because it's like also it's like really fine powder. That's very interesting.
And funnily enough, that's a popular combination in India as well. So that's probably why he was able to get it so readily.
Yeah. I think it was like and it was like cheaper than he was like chewing some tobacco at the time too.
Yeah,
and it was like cheaper than chewing tobacco, but also like more effective than chewing tobacco. So, I think it also has some. I think, it's very interesting. I think I'm just looking at the Wikipedia for this now. I think it also has like some spices and stuff in it too, which I guess like it's like a condensed version of I think the like way it's used. That's so interesting.
Yeah. It's a multifaceted, or what is faceted? That word?
Yes, multifaceted.
Yes, faceted plant.
It's so interesting how like, how complicated like humans' relationships with plants can be, and it's really really fascinating.
Yeah.
So, just anything else about betel nut? What kind of fun facts and dazzling details do we have that we might have missed?
Apparently, it's also used in Vietnam during weddings.
Oh.
Yeah, and so they the bride and groom will exchange it. So this really is an auspicious plant, despite all the issues.
Totally. I mean, once again, it reminds me of tobacco. Like tobacco is that same, in Native American cultures, is a very venerated, auspicious plant and was used in ceremony, still used in ceremony. But certain, plants like that tend to like be taken to the extreme. Actually, we were talking about that in another episode about coca. Coca leaf is used very similarly in Peru as a traditional thing, as a ceremonial thing, and then sometimes humans can't help but like take it too far.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting.
And then apparently in 2017, the world grew 1.3 million tons of it.
Whoa.
54% of it coming from India. So.
Whoa. That's a lot of betel nut. Well, let's talk. What do you know about the name betel nut? Because first of all, it's not spelled like beetle for the people listening.
No.
Right? It's Betel, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what that means?
I have no idea because in my language we call it arike, and so I had to like I when I got the email for this podcast, I was like, I want to talk about this plant, but what is it called? And it took me a lot of googling to figure out exactly what it is.
That's interesting. That makes more sense because I'm looking at the name of the palm tree is called Areca palm, so that's more.
Okay.
All right. If I figure out later what the term beetle means, I'll punch it in somewhere because it's an interesting word and it must have some meaning. And so
Yeah.
very cool. Do you have any other fun facts or dazzling details we missed about about arake?
Arike, no.
Arike?
No, I think that covers it.
Beetlejuice.
It's showtime.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing about the beetle nut with me. Do you mind if I share a nut with you?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I'm going to share about another nut, and has some similarities. It grows on a very big tree.
Okay.
The kind why it's called the nut that it is kind of also doesn't make sense. But I'll just take you. I'll paint a picture of why it's meaningful to me first, and we'll get into what it is.
Okay.
So I back, a long time ago now, like over 15 years ago, nearly 15 years ago, I lived in Switzerland. My wife and I lived in Switzerland
wow.
for about 5 years. My wife did a PhD there. And have you been to Switzerland?
No, but it's a dream spot.
It's awesome. It is such a beautiful
bet.
place and a really cool place to live. And we lived in Zurich. And every year in the winter, these little stands start popping up all over town. And there's normally two stands pretty close to each other. One of them sells Glühwein, which is a spiced mulled wine, hot wine, which is really delicious and great for a cold day. But next to it is a booth that sells what the Swiss call Heiße Maroni,
Okay.
which is a very Swissified version. The High German would be Heißen Maronen, is what I would understand. And Heißen just means hot. And
Okay.
Maroni, I'll get into exactly why this word Maroni exists, but that's essentially means chestnut. They're roasted chestnuts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's it's like a total European, a lot of places in Europe do this in the winter. You buy roasted chestnuts on the street. They smell so delicious, the roasting smell, and they taste really delicious. And it's a really fun thing to get when you're just walking down the street in the wintertime. Buy a little bag of the Heiße Maroni, get a little glass of the Glühwein, and it's just like, it's just amazing. If it's snowing,
Europe.
peak Europe in the wintertime. Just amazing. And the Heiße Maroni, they cook them on coals. They actually, the process of roasting the betel nut sounds very similar. They have this big like pan and they're like cooking them on hot coals until they crack open. And then when they serve them to you by the gram. So that's also a very like Swiss thing. Like, we're not going to, it's very, they always throw one or two extra on, the guys who sell it. They'll put it down, they'll throw one or two extra. It's like pretty cool. But then I totally forgot about this until I was just Googling a little bit ago, that when they serve it to you in this little paper bag, it's actually more like, imagine a paper bag that is not closed on one side, but then folded in half and like stapled at the bottom. So it's got two openings. So they have one side with the nuts and one side to put the shells in when you're done.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. So there's not roasted chestnut like shells all over the floor in Switzerland because they're Swiss. They think about these things too.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just really great. So that's why chestnuts are meaningful to me, because it really just evokes this like this time in my life, and it makes me think about there's that classic American Christmas song, "Chestnuts Roasting on Open Fire." I feel like we've lost that chestnut vibe in the United States, and I think it's because I won't talk about this plant in particular, but there is an American chestnut that is really like in trouble. It's like going extinct. Which I'll let someone else go into the deep dive on that. But like we don't have a ton of chestnuts here, so any chestnuts we're going to get are either actually, the people do grow the Chinese chestnut, which is Castanea mollissima, but the European chestnut is Castanea sativa, and so that's the one I'm really talking about. So let's talk about some names. I always love talking about etymology of plants. So the first one, let's talk about the scientific name. So scientific name is Castanea sativa, So Castanea is the genus, Sativa is the species. Sativa just means cultivated, which is a little bit interesting because a lot of them are cultivated, but some of them are wild. But I think they are, maybe even the wild ones have a cultivated history because they go back in
Right.
Europe for so long as being this like plant that people have really relied on for a long time.
Right.
Castanea is interesting that it probably comes from a place in, I think, Greece called Castanum, and so they grew a lot of them there, and so the Romans started calling the nut after the place. But then I read one account that maybe the place was named after the nut, and it's actually some other Proto-Indo-European
okay.
word. So it might have been
Yeah.
this bunny hop of naming, right? So that's pretty interesting. Another thing I found about the name of Castanea is that it is related to the word castanet, the Spanish instrument that goes clickety clack.
Oh yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So apparently the I thought it was because maybe the nuts go clickety clack, but no, apparently that's just the most common wood when they were invented. They were carved out of the
okay.
They were carved out of the chestnut wood. And then
Okay.
chestnut is funny because chestnut is essentially just it has nothing to do with the chest. It just is like a weird transition of that castanea word, that castan whatever in English. It started getting a chest sound, and
Yeah.
it's kind of strange that way. So yeah, that's the tree itself is really tall. It gets to be over 30 meters tall. It's one of the tallest trees in like
Oh, wow,
European
okay.
forests, and apparently they can live over 1,000 years. So
Oh,
that's
wow.
really incredible.
Yeah.
The nut itself, when it falls from the tree, is like in this thorny. It's like It's like a spiky enclosure that has the nut inside it, and inside that hard shell is the nut meat. So you have to like
Okay.
pull away that kind of splits actually open when they fall. It looks like a little like almost looks like a sea urchin or something. Like it's covered in this spine.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And then inside there's like the nut, and then you have to like roast it and then crack the nut to get the meat out. Now, this is where I was confused for a little bit because I learned them being called the high C Maroni in Swiss German, but I was like, what's this word Maroni? They're castanea, and every other word they're like chestnuts, they're castanea, they're castan. So what's with this word Maroni or Marone? There's other words like that. And I guess the difference is that it's a difference between varieties of chestnut. And chestnut is kind of an overarching term, but there is a variety there's a variety of chestnuts that are called Maroni, and they're the more cultivated ones. And the main difference is the nuts are bigger, but also the big deal is that you know how some nuts have like a papery thing over them? So you get the shell off, and then there's a kind of like a papery stuff that's not super pleasant to eat, and then there's the nut meat.
Yeah.
The Maroni ones tend to have that paper stuff come off all in one go.
Oh.
Whereas like more wild chestnuts have that can actually sometimes go into the nut, and it's really difficult to like pry it apart and get it clean.
Okay.
So Maroni is like the more prized cultivated variety that is mostly used for commercial purposes. But you might have chestnuts on your property or in the forest you go to, and those are going to be a little bit more random, and they may not be as like clean and easy to like open.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So there is like a word in Italian that is like castanea, but there's also the word Maroni, which they separate. And so yeah, that's pretty cool, I thought. The trees are where they grow, or like they grow really well in like mountainous regions of Europe and these places where it was pretty hard to farm because you live in these really mountainous regions. So they were often called the bread of the mountains because they would also grind them into a flour and use them like that, and they were just like a staple food for like mountain European people for a long time. And now they're still like very like they're like there's a little bit of like this, like the betel nut, this long cultural history. So now there's like chestnut festivals, and it's like a big deal to
wow.
to that. There was one thing I read that is the first chestnut you find in the year, if you keep it in your left pocket, it's good luck.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're ever in Europe and you find a chestnut, keep it in your left pocket.
Okay, we'll do. Do you know where the tree originated from, or the plant?
It is from Europe, even though there's a little bit of some question there.
Okay.
there's a Chinese chestnut that's Castanea mollissima.
Mhm.
There's a Japanese chestnut. There is some thinking that maybe it originated in China and then spread
Okay.
through the Eurasian continent and kind of
Mhm.
differentiated itself species-wise, but maybe some of that was through human
Right.
cultivation or whether it was
Mhm.
natural spread, but like, that the churn of plants in the Eurasian continent is like very
Yeah.
wide, and so what is natural and what it was done by humans is a pretty like difficult question to answer, I think. But they're
Right.
similar species spread all the way across. But there is also a chestnut, like I said, an American chestnut that used to be
Mhm.
very dominant in American forests, but has been basically, like I said, wiped out by a pest that is native to the Chinese chestnut, but the American chestnut was not prepared for it. I'm not actually know the details
Oh.
of that, and like I said, I'll save
Okay.
that for another episode. I think there's people
Yeah.
who are like, there are people who are really into the American chestnut.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the chestnut. Let's see a couple other fun notes here. Have you ever heard this one just popped up to me too? Have you ever heard of that saying of like, oh, that old chestnut? Like when someone's
Uh-huh.
telling a story and it's like they've said it over and over again or something. Like, oh, that old
Yeah.
chestnut. I was like, why that old
Yeah.
chestnut? And I guess there is some. Let me read this from etymology.com. This is like an inside joke that just lost its like insideness, I guess. So it says the slang sense of a venerable joke or story is from 1885, explained by U.S. actor Joseph Jefferson, is probably abstracted from the 1816 melodrama The Broken Sword by William Diamond, where an oft-repeated story involving a chestnut tree figures in an exchange between the characters Captain Xavier and Pablo.
I love
And,
it.
and then
That's so great.
I'll put the link into the full thing, but essentially there's a scene between Captain Xavier and Pablo where Captain Xavier starts telling a story about something, and then he's about to say something that fell, and then Pablo's like, a chestnut? And he's like, no, of course. No, I've heard you say this 20 times. You always say it's a chestnut. And so I guess some actors started saying it, and it really just took off, and now we all have heard that old chestnut, and we know what it means, even though we have no idea who Pablo or Captain Xavier are.
I love it. That's a great backstory.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe there's more complicated than that, but pretty funny.
We'll just use that. We'll just say that's the real one.
Yeah. Okay, so the last little thing I'll share about chestnuts is a really fun dessert, and it's also from Switzerland. And I first encountered this in like the university cafeteria, so it was like not like the high end version of it. And when I first saw it, I didn't know what it looked like. It's like a little pile of it looks like a little pile of brown spaghetti.
Oh.
And then the
okay.
sign on the thing says vermicells. So it looks like vermicelli, but like
Yeah.
and when I see vermicelli, that word comes from like worms, and I see this little pile of things, and it's called vermicelli. I'm like, what is this?
No.
But I like trying weird stuff, so I got one.
Yeah.
And it tastes very good. What it is it's a paste made out of chestnuts.
Okay.
It's chestnuts, sugar, vanilla, and then often kirsch, which is cherry brandy, blended into a paste, and then squeezed through this special press that makes it into this like little like, I don't know, think about the Play-Doh press where you squeeze it and make like the little snakes come out. Squeezed into that, and then often it's served on top of a meringue. In the case that I was having it at this cafeteria, it was on like a little like pie crust that had like custard on the bottom.
Okay.
And it's just a great tasty dessert. That is like, it's like very nutty, very delicious, kind of a weird name, kind of looks strange. But I really enjoy it. And that's another reason why I think chestnuts are meaningful to me, because of this Swiss dessert called Vermicell is how they would say it. Vermicell.
So are they like sprinkled on top of the cake or whatever it's on, or is it just like plopped on there?
They're arranged in like a little like lump.
Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't look appetizing. That doesn't sound appetizing
it doesn't. It doesn't really. But if you look a picture at it, maybe you'll think it looks more appetizing, but maybe not. And I think it's definitely not everyone is into it, but I think it's pretty good. Maybe I'll try to make it. I found a recipe. It's not too hard. I think the hardest part is getting the right tool to squeeze it out into the vermicell shape. But I guess you could do other stuff with chestnut paste. And there's lots of interesting recipes with like using chestnut flour, using chestnut paste. It's a very versatile food.
Right.
And I feel like I haven't experienced enough chestnuts now after like reading about it for this episode. So. Yeah. So yeah, that's the chestnut.
Very cool plant.
Excellent. So before we go, I was wondering if you want to stick around for the final segment of this show.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. We'll talk to you in a second.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire.
For a little bit of background, I have been following Navya on social media, and one of the things that made me connect with her is her love of Star Trek, and I'm also consider myself somewhat of a Trekkie, and so I thought it might be fun here at the end of the show to talk about the plants of the Star Trek universe.
Yes.
So what do you? First of all, I would say I didn't know this. There's a thing called Memory Alpha for you non-Trekkies out there, which is like the Wikipedia for Trekkies.
Love that website.
And there is a whole section about plants. It's actually a little bit shorter than I thought it might be after like 60 years of the show, but there is a lot. So I was reminded by a lot of plants. So I pulled out a few myself to talk about, but I'll let you take the lead of talking about plants of the Star Trek universe.
So I don't know if this counts as a plant. I'm counting them as a plant, but the Philosians.
I have them on my list. Totally. I was looking that up, and I have to admit, I didn't really know about them. I'll let you explain them in a second. But that's because they're in the animated series, and I never saw the animated series. Have you watched that one?
I watched the very first episode, and it was about the Philosians, so that's the only reason I know about them. I haven't watched the rest of the series because it's a weird series. I need to watch it.
Yeah, I know. I keep meaning to as well. So I understand they're like a sentient plant. They're like plant people, not like the plant people you see on Instagram, but like literal plants.
No. So the crew of the Enterprise land on this planet, and like Spock and the crew are just like walking around, and something like pinches him. And then they're like, what is going on? And suddenly, like, things come alive, and it's like the plants, the trees, everything is just like coming alive and like walking around. And then they're like, whoa, like, what is this planet?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I also read, and I remember it's a very like off the cuff statement, but in the show Lower Decks, they reference a Philosian tactical officer, but we never see them in that show.
No, we don't.
Yeah, so that's pretty funny. They're very kind of off. Just a one-off character that we haven't seen any other show. We got to bring some Philosians in whatever the next series is.
Yes,
it's probably just too
I mean,
yeah, the visual effects are probably pretty costly.
Yeah, but I mean, if any show can do it, it's Lower Decks, so I have faith in them.
True.
Or Star Trek Prodigy, if you've seen, I feel like they could do
I haven't.
it too.
That's on my list. I gotta watch that. Cool. So, what do you have any other plants that you pulled out?
Do you remember the Weeper plant?
I don't.
That Sulu has?
Oh no!
It's kind of like the Star Trek Venus flytrap. It's super pretty. It's like a pink flower, but it just like it's a Venus flytrap Star Trek version. And Sulu calls it Beauregard.
Okay.
Is what he calls it.
Okay. I feel like Sulu is always just like having random like life forms. There's that classic scene where he's like just holding a dog. You know that one? It's just like a dog in a costume, and he's just like holding it in the background of a scene. One thing when I was looking at plants, one that popped up, which I don't think was on Memory Alpha because it wasn't talking about specific plants, but there was an episode in the original series where they land on a planet and all the plants are acidic, and like
I don't remember.
And Chekhov touches one and it like burns his hand, and then like the like the red shirt of the episode dies by like eating a fruit.
Of course.
Yeah. And they're like the whole planet is poisonous, so that's pretty interesting. I have another one here, which is I'm a big Voyager fan as well.
Yeah.
And so the plant guy in that show is definitely Neelix Kess as well. But Neelix more, and it lasted the whole series. But he was always feeding the crew weird food for the audience. I'm loving this segment because if you're not a Trekkie, you're like, what are these guys talking about? But that's okay. Bear with the audience. It might be worth it. But there's one that he talked about. Apparently, I'm remembering now. He talked about it all the time called Leola root. Which it just the picture on Memory Alpha, it just looks like a piece of ginger with like a extra little green thing tacked onto it.
I gotta look this up.
Kind of like spray painted a little bit different color. But The Memory Alpha says, though it had an unpleasant taste and was covered in mildew, Leola root was one of the best sources of vitamins and minerals in the Delta Quadrant, so that's why he kept
Oh, wow.
feeding everybody. But of course, they're always
Yeah.
complaining about
Yeah.
Neelix's food. Yeah.
My favorite thing about Neelix and Voyager was when he tried to replace Janeway's coffee, and she was like, "No, I'm not having this. Like, give me my coffee back."
Gave her, well, yeah, some kind of weird root tea, I guess. That's funny.
Yeah, she was like, "No way."
Speaking of coffee, I was going down the rabbit hole of Roctachinos, Roctaginos, and I was like, what is a Roctagino? And apparently, it is just coffee.
Yeah,
With
it's
like,
just really strong.
I think coffee, but apparently, like it has booze in it. It's got like a Klingon booze in it, which I guess is
Okay.
a synthahol on the bridge. But I guess at some point, Klingons got Earth coffee and then started growing it on what's the planet name? I'm blanking on the Klingons.
Kronos?
Kronos, yeah. So it's like they got really into coffee and started like making their own coffee.
So is Ractogenos does it come from the coffee bean?
Yeah, apparently.
They just modify
No,
it?
apparently it's
Oh.
actual coffee. That's what I was trying to get into. It was like, what is it made from? Like, what plant
Yeah.
is it? And I guess the canon is that it is actual coffee with Klingon booze in it. And I guess there is like coffee growing on Kronos.
Okay, that makes me super concerned for Cisco because he was downing those often.
Yeah. Let's just say they must have synthahol on Deep Space Nine because he was really. I mean, everyone in that show is really into their Ractogenos. Yeah.
That would explain the decisions. They're always doing crazy things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of Deep Space Nine, I pulled out one that stood to me, which is the Gramillion Sand Pea. Do you remember this one?
No, I don't.
This was the episode where I forget the character's name, but basically there was this new Ferengi on board who actually turned out to be a woman, which was a scandal. She was like hiding the fact that she was a woman. Anyway, Ferengi culture is really weird, everybody, if you want to go into that. But this new like Ferengi in the bar was trying to like, you know, show off and suggested that Quark start serving Gramillion sand peas as a snack in the bar because when you eat them, they instantly make you super thirsty. And so it was like a free snack that is going to sell more drinks. Yeah, the
That belongs
Gramillions
with Quarks.
sand pea, and then apparently sometimes Jake and Nog threw Gramillion sand peas from the top of the walkway there in the show. So that's pretty good. Do you have any other plants that come to mind?
Well, this is just a shout out to one particular plant. I don't know. Did you ever watch Discovery?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, so remember when they come back then they flash to the future, and they come back to Starfleet and the giant elm tree is there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I couldn't narrow it down. Apparently, this was the original elm tree that was always there, but the show like went forward like 930 years. I don't know if elm trees live that long, but
I was just talking about elm trees on the show last episode or 2 episodes ago, and no, actually that episode hasn't come. Wait, no, I'm lost in time here a little bit because I've recorded. No, yeah, last episode was about elm trees. They aren't quite that long lived. They're not. The chestnut lives 1,000 years, so
right. The elm tree.
They might have cloned it and then brought
maybe.
it back, or maybe it's a holographic sculpture of the original elm tree. I thought you were going to mention one, which I had to totally be reminded of. Is there is the singing plant of Talos 4, which is apparently a total throwaway in the very first episode, The Cage, where they get to Talos and they like walk by these plants and there's these blue plants that are singing. And then when they go back to Talos and Discovery, they see them again. But the most amazing thing about the scene where they walk, like the original episode, which is not with Captain Kirk audiences, with Captain Pike, but with Spock, they walk up to these plants and they touch them, and Spock totally smiles.
Oh, I don't remember that. Oh, yes, that's the Easter egg, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's because they probably hadn't locked down Spock's character yet, right? Because he just like looks at this plant and just gives this big smile, and it was so. I just watched it just now. It's like so weird for but I guess the only thing that Spock is into is blue singing plants. But yeah, they go back to Talos and they see the plants again and Discovery as well. So I thought that was pretty fun.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, the very first episode of Star Trek had a big special plant moment. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thanks so much for talking about fake plants with me.
Anytime.
Very good. Well, yeah. We'll maybe do this again someday. If we maybe when there's a new series, we can dig into plants. Actually, I was trying to go deep dive on Saru's plants because he's a real plant guy. He's got but there's not a lot of info about them, so maybe I have to make some canon up or something. Because there's not.
No, that was funny because I was gonna do that too because this last season he spent a lot of time looking after his plants.
Yeah.
And then I was like, should I watch the whole series? Obviously, I can't because I didn't have time. But I had the same thought.
Yeah, but he's a cool guy. So yeah, I recommend watching Discovery to those out there. So yeah, anyway, thanks for bearing with us if you're not into Trek and us talking about things that don't make any sense. But if you are into Trek, I hope you really enjoyed it because I don't know. I think this is probably the first podcast to talk about just the plants of Star Trek. Cool. Well, thanks for joining me on this episode of Rootbound.
Thank you for having me.
Spock, sabotage the system.
My guest on this episode of Rootbound was Navya Mala. Navya is a total Trekkie, and she makes great Star Trek-related content on Instagram and TikTok. I'll put a link in the show notes. If you like the show and you want to help support it, visit rootboundpodcast.com/support to find all the ways you can help support the show, including sending me some feedback via email, which is rootboundpodcast@gmail.com. Rootbound is hosted by that old chestnut, Steve Ellington. Music by Christian Kriegescota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. You know, Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside, avoid the Vermilion sand pea. It's going to make you really thirsty.
Ginkgo biloba, a living fossil with an awful smell.